5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Satellite IoT, or Internet of Things. We have another episode on this topic. So, which devices or machines can we connect via satellite communications? How and why? Our guest this week to answer all this is Omar Qaise, the founder and CEO of Luxembourg-based OQ Technology, which is a prominent satellite IoT startup that already has several satellites in orbit. Enjoy.
My name is Raphael Rodkin, and I'm an investor and advisor to space companies. Just as a reminder, this podcast is for informational purposes only, and nothing should be taken as investment advice. This podcast is sponsored by Nano Avionics, a satellite manufacturer and mission integrator. Their technologies enable many space companies worldwide to offer services that improve life right here on Earth, such as providing global connectivity, conducting Earth observation, or contributing to scientific discoveries. Check them out, and also check out my episode with the CEO and co-founder. Sadly, I am not a rocket scientist, but I'm an alumnus of the International Space University. ISU offers a number of educational programs about space worldwide. Check them out at isunet.edu.
And just some final things before we start the episode about ourselves. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platforms such as Apple or Spotify. If you want us help expand our work, you can do so and support us at www.patreon.com/Space Business Podcast, and we'll also put that link in the episode notes. And lastly, you can follow us on Twitter at podcast_space. Hey, space enthusiasts, welcome back to another episode of the Space Business Podcast. This time we have a Series B stage European prominent space startup based in Luxembourg, OQ Technology. And I'm very happy that we have as our guest this week their founder, Omar Qaise, who is also the CEO of the company. Welcome, Omar.
Hi, Raphael. Thank you very much for this nice opportunity and being on your podcast. I'm really excited to be here today.
So am I. And before we kind of delve deeper into various aspects of OQ, why don't we start as we usually start with space startups? And do you mind giving us the elevator pitch on OQ Technology, please?
Yes, thanks. So, the problem, as we all know in the world, that you have cellular coverage in mainly urban areas, which are around like 20% of the world, but 80% of the world not covered. And if you look recently, the number of machines and devices connecting to the internet and communicating with each other has been a multiple of the number of humans on Earth. And that requires really a huge necessary infrastructure to connect these devices and sensors. And while cellular has taken care of that in urban areas, you still have this issue in remote and rural areas. And this comes the role of OQ, where we are connecting billions of devices in remote and rural areas through a low Earth orbit nano satellite constellation that we've been building since 2016. And we're the first company and the most advanced LEO and narrowband 5G NTN connectivity company that is following the 3GPP Release 17 standard for narrowband IoT over satellite.
Okay, great. There's a lot to unpack there, but let me take a step back, right? Because we're like, a non-technical podcast and trying to get more people into the space sector. So always trying to explain a little bit what's behind of everything. So when you're saying sort of lack of connectivity and especially for devices, because if it, I think the average person, including me, when we think about sort of devices connecting to the internet, I think, okay, my Tesla connects to the internet and sort of like, Apple AirTags everywhere. Like I'm thinking about putting an Apple AirTag on my cat. Sort of, can you give us some example of sort of like, what would be devices which are very often or typically outside of coverage that really benefit from this type of connectivity?
Indeed. So what you just mentioned are the typical, let's say, like devices we see in cities, like on smart cities. Mm-hmm. But there are devices that are really outside in remote areas, mainly like connected, let's say, the enterprise business. So, for example, if you look at energy companies, for example, you have the windmills, you have smart grid for electricity, the utilities, you have pipelines for oil and gas, for water, that you have meters measuring different parameters. And these sensors, or for example, for detection, they need to be connected and send messages. You have trackers. Just you mentioned like the Apple tag, which is a great example, but that would not work, for example, in an area where there's no coverage of cellular or Bluetooth coverage. And if you are are tracking assets, or you're tracking, for example, cars, or and as you said, smart cars is also an example. If you go out of cellular coverage, who's going to provide the coverage for that car or drone or whatever that is? That's on one side. On the other side, you have in agriculture also a lot of use cases, a lot of sensors that are, temperature, humidity, fertilizer sensors, weather stations that need or mold detectors that need to be connected, and you need to get all that data from large fields into the center, and that requires also connectivity. And of course, you're talking now about automated machines, automated drones, even in the sea, and all this will require connectivity. And that connectivity is very special. It's not the typical connectivity with a satellite dish or the broadband or what you have. They're normally very bursty communication. They have to be low power because the devices may survive on a battery in such an area for long term, and they have to be low cost. So traditional satellite connectivity solutions don't work with that type of devices. You're talking about millions of distributed sensors and devices. Talk about predictive maintenance. For example, if you have pumps or wellheads or machines in mining, you need to monitor very critical parameters in order to predict when will be the next maintenance, or one machine is going to fail, for example. And that could save a lot of money for the enterprise operating that, if you could predict in advance and plan where you do your maintenance. And of course, this requires continuous trending and reporting of the performance of such machines.
This is very interesting. So it sounds like primarily a B2B use case, and you've gone through sort of a few examples of what type of devices people would want to monitor. How are they doing it right now, or are they doing it at all?
By sending people into the field, believe it or not, or sending helicopters or people in cars into areas which are very dangerous. And then you have to check, is there a leak, or is everything fine? Or let me take the measurement. Because, let's look, for example, at the oil and gas industry or the utilities industries. These things exist since long time. But let's say fiber cables and all the advancement in installing private network with cellular, they came later. But you may have like the new assets and the new infrastructure covered with this connectivity type, but you still have old assets that, investing in putting in new infrastructure to cover vast areas is really very expensive. So what do you do about that? There comes the role of our IoT service. We could provide very affordable, low-cost satellite connectivity in such areas that can even save lives or reduce the cost of whether it's helicopters or people you need to send into such areas to collect measurements, or workers in the fields and in the agricultural field. So that's the role we can come in and cover such cases without the need to invest in huge infrastructure in remote rural areas of laying fiber cables or broadband cellular towers or connecting VSAT stations to every windmill, which doesn't make sense. It's an overkill.
And so you mentioned low cost there. Can you give us an idea for, if you pick one of these examples, for example, like a sensor in an agricultural field, how much the customer would roughly pay for that?
So normally, if cellular is very cheap, you get data plans which may cost only a few cents for a kilobyte of data, but that's on terrestrial. Now, if you're in remote areas, then you've got services like Iridium, Globalstar, which are expensive. A kilobyte will cost you more than $2-3 or something like this, and depending on volume, of course. Here we're talking something in between. We're trying to target an ARPU, for example, 45, 40 cents, 30 cents, something like this, which is still, at least when talking to customers, they're all happy with the pricing and something they can afford. It's still cheaper than traditional satellite. If you talk about the hardware, whether it's a gateway or a connectivity device, it's much, much cheaper than BGAN M2M or the Iridium devices or Thuraya devices. We're talking about really a few $100s compared to $1,000 or more, So that's really affordable. Now, if you talk about the modules, so traditionally satellite modules cost minimum, let's say $90, $100. Now you've got some proprietary satellite IoT companies coming up with modules like $60, like for example, Astroca, Swarm. But if you look at cellular modules, they cost like $8, $13, $15, or $20. And these terrestrial modules have such a low cost due to the economies of scale, because you have a standard that everyone follows everywhere in the world, which is cellular. Now imagine that module starts connecting to satellites with the same price as a terrestrial module. That's a game changer. That never existed before. It will allow a lot of applications to be addressed now. Like, for example, real-time tracking has been always limited to critical assets. There are a lot of companies today, they are producing like very fine trackers or barcode type of trackers that can connect to terrestrial. But now if you want to add a satellite component to it and integrate modules from traditional players, suddenly the bill of material of that barcode or patch tracker jumps a lot. That is not affordable anymore. Some of these trackers should be even disposable. So the cost has to be so low that allows such use cases. And if the same cellular tracker that are working today can connect to satellite without really changing the technology and the hardware, boom, then you have 90% of the real-time tracking market open up for critical and non-critical assets to be tracked.
And so just to be clear, so I think you answered my question. I was going to ask you as the next question whether you are doing some of these hardware, the sensors and the modules in-house, but it sounds like the whole point here is that you could work with sort of like off-the-shelf existing hardware.
Exactly. So the modules that are coming up in the market, they are standard modules from the known chip manufacturers and module makers for cellular. They are now in the process of releasing the modules for non-terrestrial networks in LEO, release 17. These will be able to connect immediately to our satellite network, because even the spectrum that we use on our satellite is the standard 3GPP spectrum that was assigned for non-terrestrial networks. And we've been working on this since years. So we're well covered here. But also we have our own line of products of devices for users who are not device makers, because a module is good for someone who want to integrate the module into their device or sensor machine. But some others, they just want to pick up and have an end-to-end solution. And we can enable that also using our products like the OQ1, which is kind of a gateway that connects using standard industrial interfaces to sensors, and then sends the data to the satellite through a narrowband IoT link. We have also the TrackMe, the OQ TrackMe, which is a tracker both for industrial and for consumer products. But that's just for users who quickly want to come up and have connectivity and a solution. But for others, they can bring their own product or module as long as it's 3GPP standard NTN connectivity module or device, and it will work with our satellites. And that's what will enable the economies of scale globally.
Let me just open a quick bracket here on the regulatory side before I forget it, because you mentioned there's something like you're using the same type of spectrum that's used terrestrially. And so I'm not a regulatory expert. I just sort of like obviously following a lot of the what's called the direct-to-device kind of trend in the larger space satellite communication sector. I mean, focusing more on mobile phones rather than that humans use rather than devices. But there's been a lot of talk that how this might not be very trivial from a regulatory point of view. So it seems like you were able to manage like using this terrestrial spectrum for basically space use as well.
So I have to correct you here. It's not actually terrestrial spectrum. It's the band sitting beside the terrestrial spectrum, N256, N255. So traditionally, these are mobile satellite bands, MSS, but they were attractive to be used on this non-terrestrial network because you could have a hardware that covers both, that you're not jumping from a band into a really totally different band for satellite. And that's what 3GPP laid down to be used for NTN, the L band and the S band, which is traditionally used for MSS over satellite. And indeed, if you look at the terrestrial bands in the past, it was already like these were terrestrial bands, but they were not used. They were not rolled out as terrestrial. And this, through the discussions and what 3GPP standards release 17, these bands were allocated actually for satellite that will work with terrestrial modules, so you can switch easily between the two bands. Now that's different from, let's say, what SpaceX with T-Mobile or others trying to do is to lease or use the actual terrestrial cellular spectrum today to use it off satellite, because there you get into trouble with interference and regulatory and stuff. And these are two approaches for getting into this market. Either there's a mobile operator who tells you can use that part of my spectrum because it's already, I'm not using it on terrestrial or not going to cause interference, or you follow the standard bands that were allocated by 3GPP or recommended by 3GPP, which are going to be on the new chips. All the new chips will have that. And you've heard about the Qualcomm Iridium thing that took place recently. Well, from what we know publicly, Iridium bands, L bands, are not the 3GPP assigned bands for for using cellular over satellite. So if you're a smartphone maker, do you want to have a chip that has proprietary bands in there, or you have to have the bands that everyone who's going to do NTN satellite 3GPP going to use? So that's the choice here. And then you have, of course, the others who get approval from the mobile operator to use their band, but then you'll get into regulatory issues. You may need, special hardware. Yeah.
Okay, got you. Thank you for that. Closing the regulatory bracket. Now, coming back to another related aspect. So, we're talking about here sensors and other types of modules and even spectrum bands and, of course, satellites. So, if I'm a user, let's say I'm like a farmer, even a bigger farmer, it sounds very complicated, to be honest. So how does that sale look like? For example, are you selling directly to end customers, or are you working with some type of, system integrators in between who are, making this, let's say, more user-friendly to the end customer, or how does that all work?
Yeah, so today, we are working with enterprise directly. So these are the companies that have operations and need connectivity. We also working with MNOs, MVNOs, who are kind of like in between the end user and us, and planning to have like global roaming over satellite, and then they can provide such services. This is in the process right now. So, but of course, we get approached also by end users who want such a solution, and if they are not addressed by any system integrator or MNO right now, we're also offering the service. So if you are a farmer, for example, and you have, for example, your local service provider, connectivity provider does not have a solution for connectivity in remote areas, their SIM cards doesn't work there, then we can give you, either the SIM card that connects you to our satellites, and then you have the connectivity. Plus, if you have your own hardware, that's great. If you don't, we can also give you hardware. So that's how it works. Plus, we have a platform. So if you have your own platform, you don't need that from us. But if you have nothing and you need access to the data to see it, we have our own online cloud-based platform.
So you have like a user front end. Basically.
Exactly, and you can control. You can see the measurement coming from the devices. You can switch on, switch off. You can, do all the type of network management thing for your own asset.
I guess related question there is sort of like what does or what did your go-to-market look like? For example, are you starting with like certain large enterprise users in certain verticals, and then you're kind of going towards the like mid-size and smaller, or expand into other industries, or how are you guys doing the go-to-market?
Yeah, believe it or not, the enterprise adoption has been quicker, which came as a surprise to us. So because these are the people with the problems, they have a problem today, they have use cases, they are considered an end user who need a solution. So the pickup in our side has been quick with the enterprise user, but now also MNOs and MVNOs are realizing the importance of NTN. The new release is out, because the thing is also we started early. So we started, we are part of 3GPP, we are part of the discussions. However, we were also very quick in realizing the value of this. We are addressing customers, and that's why enterprise users were very interested in what we do. Now, as the release it was standardized last year, and now you've got the MNOs and VNOs getting into this. So we're also having through the MNOs and VNOs the relationship to address the market and go into the market. Of course, in future OEMs could be also interesting once the modules will be available. These are also the third tranche of the customers. Regarding verticals where energy is a big focus right now, maritime and logistics, this is also the two big focus for us right now.
And so can you give some examples for energy and maritime, how they're specifically using it?
Yeah, so for energy, we're addressing different use cases. So for example, wellhead monitoring, like for different parameters, pipeline monitoring, asset tracking non-critical. So for example, you have yards of assets and devices and machines or materials, and you need to know, okay, where is my asset in inventory today? Where is that? Did it move to a different place or something? Believe it or not, some people may want to use Earth observation to count, the assets in the open area inventories, and that's not very very efficient cost-wise and time-wise, and that's why the industries benefit a lot from such service. Now, in the maritime industry, so you have, for example, fishing boats that need to do reporting of how much you captured, what did you do, blah, 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 all these types of things which are kind of getting enforced right now. So that's also another aspect we are looking at. As I said, Energy has been the quickest adopter of our technology and solutions, and we're looking at other areas right now.
Have you found that this is more sort of like the go-to-market is more of a push that you guys have to go out to certain verticals and explain how your technology and infrastructure can be used, or sort of like a demand pull of people coming to you and say, hey, I read you guys have this IoT connectivity, and can you please explain how we can use it?
I would say it's a combination of both. So it's been a pull in certain areas. It's been a push in others. I think the more you go into, let's say, the side of end user, smaller players, this has been more like a push to educate them. Okay, this is not your typical expensive satellite connectivity, because satellites are, that's expensive, I don't want to get there. While it's been more of a pull regarding enterprise, so that's and MNOs also. So they are coming out to us, and they are realizing how advanced we are and what we have, and the capabilities that we have, the spectrum that we have, which is very essential in the go-to-market. We have a clear strategy about that. Others don't. We have 8 satellites in orbit, other in LEO, others don't. So we're functional. We're commercial ready.
And so let's actually talk about this for a few minutes. There's 8 satellites in orbit. So what kind of coverage does that provide you and the customers?
So the coverage is global. It's just that the revisit time, of course, how many contacts per day, that varies depending on where you are. So we are, as we roll out the constellation, we are addressing step-by-step applications which are latency tolerant and trying to get later into more the latency intolerant and critical applications. But the coverage is global. We have polar orbits right now, 8 satellites. So wherever you are, you're going to see the satellite, but it's going to be a few times a day.
And so what's your ultimate plan for constellation size and revisit rate?
Normally we're targeting a constellation right now with 72 satellites. This is the target where we want to go, and that will allow us also to address a lot of applications that cannot be addressed right now.
Okay, what would be, so because when I've looked at this in the past, there's been sort of like a lot of people typically saying, oh yeah, many IoT use cases, it's like one message a day, sort of like, status check. But what would be some examples of lower latencies or higher frequency use cases?
Yeah, well, it not just depends on the number of messages, it depends on the response time. So alarms, for example, you can't wait a day to get that. Tracking also, you need if you have continuous, of course, tracking, then you need very frequent messaging. So it's really about the response and the volume you can provide. And also the same with commanding, if you're sending or updating, sending commands down, because it's two-way. Now, if you look at the one message per day with a lot of pairs, that is good for certain markets and for certain volume, but it will never scale up large, so to say. You need in the end to scale up. If you talk about agriculture, maybe once a day, or a smart meter that sends a daily consumption report of electricity or water, okay, that's fine. But then, smart meters, some are well covered by cellular, the ones which are not. Like if you look in Africa, you have such meters, and you need to cover this with satellite connectivity. But again, it's in the end, you need to move into lower response time and higher volume. So that's the thing. And startups that promise just one message a day will cut and will do the return of investment on long term, that's not going to be realistic.
And so what kind of satellites are we talking about here? Are those sort of, I don't know, 3, 6U CubeSats, or what sort of platform are you using?
Yeah, we use the 6U platform for now. So these are our satellites, and they are very cost effective. We try to minimize the constellation capex to address the IoT market. So, we don't want to now go into different things or play the big, we're not in the broadband, market where SpaceX fighting with AST and all these guys. No, that's not our thing. So look, I always make this comparison. Our business is to deliver pizza. To deliver a pizza, I don't need a Lamborghini. I need a bicycle or a Mofa to get and deliver it. So let's keep our cost low and have a constellation that delivers to that IoT market, specifically narrowband communication. And that will allow us then to get in the end the benefits and the return of investment.
Yeah, and I guess, Niva, are you in the sort of direct to device, direct to mobile business, in the sense of like going beyond text messages where they need these like huge satellites like AST with Blue Walker?
So we are I would say in the direct to device, but not direct to mobile, because we connect to devices directly without, let's say, a big terminal and dish. But we're not in direct to mobile like Link and these guys. But it's in the future roadmap, in the technology roadmap, because we are following 3GPP. There is no, technology-wise, is not a difference between the two. You just need bigger satellites, bigger antennas. And spectrum-wise, technology-wise, is all the same. But that's the market we're targeting right now in our business case. But in the roadmap, it's in the future. And to be honest, we did get approached by smartphone makers and to assess the Link budget and all that and the challenges. Of course, you need bigger satellites for this in order to connect, and that's where Link and the others. And I think IST is more broadband on direct to mobile, not just messaging.
Okay, and speaking of, smartphones are basically the end terminal, so to say. In terms of really growing this subsector, you were mentioning you're using basically off the shelf receivers, sensors, and that is giving you the advantage of the economies of scale. But are you satisfied with the receivers that are out there? For example, things like battery life. If you're really in a remote location, like it's fine if you no longer have to send people there to like monitor on a daily basis, but you also don't want to send people there, I don't know, like every few months to swap a battery, right?
Yeah. So narrowband IoT, if you look at the standard, was made for kind of low power bursty communication. Ideally, a battery should last 10 years on a cellular terrestrial narrowband IoT. Now, of course, if you're going to use it a lot, that's going to consume a lot. And they are optimizing. Like every release, there's more optimization happening there. What we have today, of course, I would say no. There's still a lot to be done more, but it's much better than before. You're not going to send every month or 2 months someone to change the battery. That's not the case. Probably in a year or 2 years' time, depending on your consumption, which is good enough, much better than before in the world of satellite machine connectivity. And that's actually one of the items customers look at. And we have a very good product. At least if you look at our own devices, they have much longer battery life than Orbcomm or Inmarsat products that 48 hours is dead, while we can have something that goes for a year, and depending on consumption, and it's still alive. So we took these things into account. That's why we are addressing our enterprise needs carefully. I hope, of course, the end target is the smartphone. I mean, that's a very attractive market for future. But let's see how the game plays. Now there's this battle of the smartphone through satellite connectivity. We're taking the approach a bit the other way around, starting with narrowband IoT, going in future more to direct to device, rather than starting directly with direct to mobile.
Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to ask about in terms of connecting devices. So this is a non-video podcast, but you can see I'm wearing an Aura ring, for example. But so because wearables is a giant market as well, right? But I guess then for wearables, like the smartphone would always act as the like a gateway, I suppose.
Yeah, indeed, wearables is attractive. I think before going into smartphone, wearables will be our next target, because these are IoT devices in the end, and consumers are using that. They are everywhere. And again, because as your ring is so small and probably the antenna is not really that pointy, and you cannot put your fist up in the sky to connect to the satellite. There will be a game. But the nice thing is, compared to GEO, like if LEO NTN has a high potential of connecting wearables, because first, you don't need pointing like a GEO, because the satellite can come from any angle. So it's going to pick up the signal, with the wearable. That's one thing. The other thing, link budget is much better. You're closer to Earth. You're not 36,000 kilometer away. You're just 500 kilometer away, which is really very interesting for direct to connectivity, low power consumption, smaller antennas. So I see this is the value of our network in LEO of 5G NTN compared to GEO 5G NTN, is that IoT, you can have a better link budget. And I think already we see in the market and from clients, there are some players out there using the legacy LEO leased spectrum to offer narrowband IoT over GEO. It's very limited. It's really very limited. And if you want to get more out of that, you're going to have to go to LEO.
And so the other question I want to ask, on the technology side is, so as we're connecting more and more devices, hopefully, and some of them are, in some sense, critical devices, what's the role of cybersecurity here? And is it on the client's minds? And then how are you guys addressing it?
Yeah, so this is a very good question. Indeed, if cybersecurity is a big topic in IoT, it's especially energy companies also look at it highly because it's a critical asset, and that's why they see, for example, a 3GPP standard technology, which is similar to cellular, and it has its own, let's say, security aspects, authorization and encryption aspects, SIM card authentication, and all that. This package comes with the standard. We don't need to invent it. It's already in there. There is a lot of security aspects. There's a whole working group of security in 3GPP for cellular. So when you're aligned with the standard, at least what I'm doing here is similar to what I'm doing with the mobile operator. So all these security aspects are taken care of. Rather, if I go to a technology that I don't know, a proprietary satellite technology or a LoRa kind of tech, it has security gaps. It's a simple protocol and not as complex as narrowband IoT. Simple protocols connect very good to satellite, but that comes at the expense of something. The handshaking and the security aspect there, it's weak. So you don't see that going into enterprise users who are very critical, or smart, car makers or drones or stuff. You need to be sure the standard helps in that. So we follow the standard wherever it comes with the standard from security aspect that need to be respected, need to be implemented, the encryption and so on. And of course, there is always room to improve and add, extra layers of cybersecurity depending on the customer need. But working with a client like Aramco, for example, which is the world's largest oil and gas company, believe me, security is a big choice factor in choosing the technology.
Okay, makes sense. So coming back to the markets, the verticals, the use cases, right? And you've already mentioned that, right now, for example, energy and maritime are big markets for you. So what are you most excited about right now? But also, I think the more interesting question is, what are you more excited about, possibly of like future use cases, future verticals?
I've been always excited about the unexpected use cases that customers come up with, like we never thought of them. Okay, we know, for example, tracking and all that, but when you have a client who says, okay, we are in a country where it's very vast, very large, and we do fences, and these fences, to protect animals or people from crossing, and they have you have also their sensors, you have batteries, and it's hundreds of kilometers of a fence. I'm like, wow, I never thought about that. And you need to cover this with devices that give readings. You cannot put a satellite dish or a beacon or iridium terminal every 50 kilometers. That will be an overkill, But our solution is suitable for something like that. So such use cases are very interesting. So honestly, I'm always open to learn from users unexpected things, that they come up to. So these actually the things which we look for. Again, I'm more inclined towards the enterprise remote area applications and use cases that come out there. A lot of users there are deprived today from satellite connectivity because it's expensive and it's bulky hardware and traditional. So there are a lot of players and users there that wish they could have an affordable satellite connectivity working with mobile, also cellular. So they always try to find if their their GSM signal to connect to. If you can't find 5G, so what if their GSM, the minimum on cellular, and they can't find. So offering something over the sky that's compatible with mobile and low cost is a big is an enabler for a lot of users.
Is there anything sort of like fun, crazier on your mind? I'll just give you one example. There's some of our venture capitalists which rightly or wrongly believe that, like the Tesla Optimus, like the humanoid robot. Like some of us believe that, like, I don't know what the right time frame is, a decade or 2 decades down the road, there might be millions of these around the world and they all have to be connected, right?
Exactly. So something like that, which is also scary, but it's coming, at some point. Yeah, and these will be all connecting to satellites,
Yeah, that's why the cybersecurity is very important, because we've all seen the movie or read the book I, Robot.
Yeah, exactly. Well, okay. The other thing is the resilience, like with LEO networks, you have multiple satellites. If few fail, it does not interrupt the service per se. But if you look what happened recently with the GEO satellites that failed, suddenly you lost like third of the world connectivity, Yep. And to replace this will take years and cost a lot. And Starlink, for example, and all these LEO constellations, including our constellation, add a factor, maybe not everyone realizes that, but is the resilience. If you lose satellites, if someone shoots satellites, you still have ongoing service, it will not be completely interrupted. And that's why LEO is important.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I mean, purely from also a national sort of like security and like geopolitical risk point of view, I think that's where things are going, right? And this is why, entities like the SDA in the US are investing heavily in LEO networks. So let me also ask about sort of the wider market, I guess, right? A wider satellite IoT market, because it's been interesting. And then some people would even say frustrating for some of the entrepreneurs and investors. So if you look over the last few years, right, there was a time, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, there was a lot of excitement, and there was a lot of companies, like in my venture capital, where we got pitched a lot by IoT companies, and of course, stupidly, we didn't invest in OQ because you guys are clearly doing very well.
It's too late now. Too late.
Yes, and now, of course, you're too successful for us as a seed stage fund, but we'll come back to that. But there was a lot of players around, right? And you know all of them. And then it's been interesting. So some of them, and we won't mention any names, but I think people know, some of them outright folded. They basically went away. There's some interesting things like, Swarm got acquired by SpaceX, but then some people say that may have been for, certain reasons like Spectrum and even like so-called acquihire. There have been like merger attempts, which then failed. There have been listing attempts that then failed. There have been some companies which suddenly made very significant pivots to the extent that, it's unclear whether they're actually an IoT company anymore. So where do you see, like, where we are today with this experience of a few years, where do you see the satellite IoT market going? And why do you have conviction your approach is the right approach?
Yeah, very interesting, Raphael. Yeah, because when we started also, this was big height of satellite IoT, and there was a time that I'm the only one. What? You see, there are companies, and then they keep popping up like mushrooms. So, and now it's cleared. I think I'm still strongly opinionated that the standard will prevail. It's like the beginning of the 2G. You had different technologies for mobile connectivity. It's not just the GSM. No, there were a lot of other technologies, but what prevailed in the end is the standard that the world followed. And that's when we started, we looked at 3 technologies. It was Sigfox, LoRa, and Narrowband IoT Release 13, which was terrestrial at that time. And we studied each one, and we said, okay, if that thing in cellular, and there were discussion of bringing that to satellites already, it wasn't new, it's going to go into satellite, you cannot stand in the face of 3GPP. This is a huge body of all the mobile and all the chip and all the operators in the world of cellular, that's gonna roll out globally, and it's better we stick with the standard rather than reinvent the wheel of Globalstar and Iridium, or use the technology which is not vetted by a big body like 3GPP, which in this case Sigfox, or which in the end you saw what happened to Sigfox, and I personally believe LoRa is going the same path. So for me, is most of these startups, they did the damage to themselves, but to us also, because they brought the bad reputation to satellite IoT. I mean, if you're coming up with something where you're just competing on price, promising low, but I'm redoing the story of Iridium in the 90s. You can't beat them. Iridium has the network. They did this business, and they don't care to lower their price because, still they have the connection to the customer. Cheap doesn't mean always good, So that, unfortunately, we saw with investors and stuff, like it kind of spilled over into everyone. Companies folded, stopped offering service. Car makers are skeptic, like, why should I put a chip in my car for a company I don't know that may disappear tomorrow? But if I put a chip from OQ, which is 5G standard, then OQ goes bust. Oh, I have the other operators following the standard. The chip is coming from Qualcomm or whoever. I'm covered, it's like mobile. If one operator disappears, there's in the country the other operator. So that's why we said no, we stick with the standard. And that's where we attracted our investor, where they saw value. Okay, that's coming up. And then the change where Apple brought this direct to mobile connectivity, Samsung, everyone's following suit. That created now a new rush into, okay, this is where it's going. It's direct to device, direct to mobile, whether it's broadband or IT. That's where the world is heading. Staying in the past of proprietary satellite connectivity is not going to continue for very long, and companies need to adapt. If spectrum is going to be standardized, module is going to be standardized, connectivity is going to be standardized, you as a customer or an operator, why would you go with something private and proprietary with one company? Why? I mean, there's no reason. If you're a smartphone makers, why would you do that? If there's out there a global standard everyone is using. If I go now to let's pick up some country random. I don't know if I'm in Chile or Argentina, and I say, look, here is a phone from let's say X company, but it doesn't use 4G and 5G. It uses I don't know, La Land connectivity towers and technology. It's different. And you can't roam everywhere, and it's a special technology. Who's going to buy that? No, nobody's going to buy that. So you see, that's I think the mistake companies followed, going too early or doing IPOs too early, SPACs and all this, and not following the standard. So yeah, I believe we bet on the right horse, and we're doing well right now.
Makes sense. So let's review sort of the timeline and where you guys are as a company. And actually, let me take a step back while we're talking about timeline. I forgot to ask you before, like, how did you actually come up with this? Like, why? What was the original motivation to do this?
So I was actually, when before I started OQ, I was working with SES in Luxembourg, and I'm like, I'd like to do something with CubeSats. Nano satellites is very interesting invention, and the standard nano satellites, and I want to do something with that in the telecom field. Everyone was doing Earth observation, stuff like that. But then, you cannot do much with a nano satellite as a broadband because of the limitations you have. And then I suddenly started seeing terrestrial LP1 spreading, like low power wide net, like Sigfox, LoRa, and all that. And you have small devices connecting directly to a station. And I said, let me calculate the link budget. Does this will work on a LEO satellite? Oh, and it does work. And it's, you don't need a big satellite to do that. And then I was so surprised when I read that the number of devices connecting to the internet surpassed the number of human beings on Earth. And that's, I saw, okay, this is gonna be critical. There will be a lot of devices. There's not good, the infrastructure is not made to connect such devices. You need low power, you need low cost connectivity. satellites will play a role. So it's a kind of combining nanosatellites with the LP1 and coming up with the right thing. This is where the vision came, and making, on a handkerchief some calculations of link budget that works. That said, okay, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna start this. So I quit my job and started OQ.
Gotcha. And so now, obviously, you guys have, as you mentioned, several satellites operating in orbit. You seem to have commercial traction. If you're working with companies like Aramco, you're doing I think a Series B funding round right now for, I suspect, further build out, right, of the satellite constellation. Where do you see the company in 5-10 years, ideally?
5-10 years, we'll be doing probably 6G, 7G over satellite. So this is the thing. Once you are in the standard, this is a generation-wise business. They're going to come up with 6G. 6G going to have satellite factor in it. If your infrastructure is doing 5G over satellite, and the change and the backward compatibility is easy, then you're going to roll out 6G over satellite, then 7G, and there will be new use cases and new features. So I'm very excited, thrilled about this, and I would like to see OQ as a global player that is leading cellular connectivity over satellite, over multiple technology generation, not just 5G.
Okay, so it's basically what you're doing right now, but sort of like scaling along various aspects, I suppose. Okay, that makes a lot of sense, and that's why you're raising money to enable that scaling. As we're kind of getting towards the close here, let me ask you some questions I ask often towards the end of an episode. So you're based in Luxembourg. Do you want to speak a little bit about how the ecosystem has been? But I think you're based in Luxembourg, but you're also doing a lot in the Middle East. So if you want to talk about that as well, feel free to.
Yeah. So the company group, the headquarters in Luxembourg, we have subsidiaries in Greece, in Athens, in Dubai, in Saudi Arabia, and in Rwanda and Africa, other parts of the world, of course, the big markets. That Luxembourg has been really instrumental in this journey. We even started, 2016. It was early days. Sometimes I like to think we're, the really first new space startup in Luxembourg, because we had only big companies at that time. Of course, later on, a lot of companies start coming, and with the creation of Luxembourg Space Agency and the push towards the asteroid mining and the space and all this attracted a lot of companies. This has been very instrumental. I mean, Luxembourg is an innovative country. You have direct access to decision makers. You can pitch your idea and work with different government entities to find the right solution, how to implement things. And really, this is a big factor here. They've been very supportive also at the beginning financially. So a lot of funding at the beginning came from actually government contracts. It's the national program of Luxembourg, which, we're talking more than 7 million of non-dilutive funding that got us where we are. Then we went out to get the seed round, and then Series A last year, which was done with 5G Ventures and Aramco. So I think we have been, if I want to think of another country where at that time that could, really help in this, I mean, of course, US is a, the big entrepreneurial space country, but in Europe, I see Luxembourg well positioned also for space startups, I mean, if I go back in time, I think it was the right move.
How's it been being on the ground in a country like Saudi Arabia? I mean, obviously a country with very big space ambitions.
You see, so I'm seeing the story of Luxembourg unfolding again. That's the nice thing, and Saudi Arabia has been very amazing now with their space program, the push for space, and really looking into commercial space also. That's very important. Also supporting ambitious space startups. But the country is so big, and there's a lot of use cases and a lot of things to do. It's unimaginable. The regulatory authority there also is very well versed in space, and they understand satellites, and they understand spectrum, and they are out there on the look also of new technology, whatever brings the latest in space into the country. And you've seen, and we've been also a lot of contributing. We have local team there, which is also nationals there. So we are also, and there we're close to our clients, but also we're covering whole region, like of Middle East with our service. So I think Saudi Arabia is up to big things in space, and I'm very excited about that also.
Yeah, and to your point that they're savvy there. I mean, and I had a chance to speak to the Minister of Telecommunications, who I guess is also looking after space, extremely sharp person.
Exactly. I mean, if space is a big part of the strategy of the country and the vision of 2030, you say, okay, wow, that's what best than that can you get? It's not a private, no, it's a national thing. The government, the country sees space as strategic. I mean, it's amazing.
Yep, we got to get somebody from the KSA government on this podcast working on that. So a couple of final questions for you, Omar. If you weren't doing OQ, but of course you're sort of aware of what's going on in the space sector at large, is there any other sort of area of activity, of commercial activity you'd find particularly exciting?
In space or not space, you mean?
In space. Well, it doesn't have to be physically in space, but like a space-related business model.
Yeah. So, launchers has been always something very exciting, but now it's, I think SpaceX is really driving everyone out, and it's very, I wouldn't want to be on the show of people competing in this market unless there's a big technology shift or something that has not been looked at. I think launcher is exciting. Now, commercial, whether this would be successful business or not, right now, that's a different story. I think that's let's see. I mean, launcher still attracts me, and I'm just following what's going on in this area of. And now you have also the quantum aspect in space. That's also a very interesting dimension. I think these two are very exciting aspects in space right now, revolutionary. For launchers, let's wait and see. This is very interesting, actually, what's going on, because we are seeing a market where there is a very advanced player with a lot of capabilities, and we see all other players are kind of struggling to match or access. So it's a kind of, for me, a wait and see how this plays out. But let's see.
I guess there's one very easy question I can ask you. Who are you launching on?
Well, we use, we do rideshare. So we did Vega, we do SpaceX, of course, and whatever opportunity is there, we are just like the other CubeSat players looking for the rideshare opportunities wherever that is possible.
And the final question we always ask is about science fiction. And this is whether you like science fiction. I hope yes. And if so, what are some of your favorite works? This could be movies or books or TV series, anything.
Well, I started as a child with space and space movies and science fiction, but I think the one that always sticks to mind and I keep looking at, I don't think, I don't want to upset any fans here or anything, but at least my taste is Battleship Galactica has been always, an interesting artwork that I haven't seen any. My view again, that personally, I'm still looking for something as exciting as it is. That's. But I would say recently I've been very busy that I kind of detached from science fiction movies and stories and stuff. It's a day and night job right now, especially with the new fundraiser.
Yeah, so Battlestar Galactica is definitely also a favorite of mine, and particularly the remake. I mean, the old 70s one is fun, but the remake, I think, is
funny enough, I say the same. I say the same. I still remember when I was a child and I was watching. Okay, well, I was born in the 80s, but I used to see the one from the 70s, and I liked it, much more than the future versions. Yeah, I keep saying that.
Yeah, it's sort of like, it actually goes back to sort of the question from before, like sort of like the humanoid. This is like the humanoid, the Tesla Optimus gone wrong, obviously. They've gone very wrong, but they're probably all connected, or they must all be connected. So there you go, you're back to IoT connectivity. But Omar, thank you so much for coming on. Best of luck to OQ operationally and including your current fundraise. And it was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much, Rafael. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast. And I look forward to meet you soon in one of the events. We keep passing each other.
Absolutely, we will. Or maybe even in Saudi Arabia, where I have to go.
Let me know when you're there. Thanks a lot.
That's good. Thanks, Omar.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for another nominal episode of the Space Business Podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving it a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, such as iTunes. You can follow us on Twitter at podcast_space. Also consider supporting us at www.patreon.com/spacebusinesspodcast. If the podcast got you interested in learning more about the business opportunities in the space economy, check out my new online course on space entrepreneurship on udemy.com. The link is in the episode description. Lastly, if you have any feedback, including ideas for guests, and that may include yourself if you have an exciting space story to tell, or interested in being a sponsor, drop us an email at spacebusinesspodcast@gmail.com. I look forward to seeing you for the next episode.